This wealthy tycoon accidentally discovers that the son he has cherished for 6 years actually shares absolutely no blood relation with him.
生物学的親子でないと鑑定し、結論する。
The exact moment the doctor drops the paternity results, Ryota's mind goes completely blank. For a man who is always calm, composed, and tightly guarded with his emotions, he feels a dizzying, world-spinning panic for the very first time. At just 40 years old, he is already a top executive at an elite architectural firm, holding a prestigious social status that everyone envies while living an incredibly wealthy and comfortable life. Because his own childhood was plagued by a chronic lack of paternal presence, he pours everything he believes to be the absolute best into his only son without holding anything back. Growing up in a spacious, luxurious, high-end apartment, 6-year-old Keita wants for nothing, with a meticulously managed life, various talent classes, and every developmental resource at his fingertips. However, this peaceful existence is completely shattered by a sudden, out-of-the-blue notification from the hospital. What is supposed to be a routine health follow-up and blood check takes a shocking turn when the hospital discovers a glaring anomaly during data cross-referencing, revealing that the blood types and genetic markers between Riota, his wife Midori, and their 6-year-old son Keita are fundamentally mismatched. The hospital immediately pulls up the maternity records from years ago and confirms a brutal, absurd reality. On the exact day Midori gave birth to a baby boy 6 years ago, another mother delivered a son at the same hospital, but a reckless mistake by the nurse on duty caused the 2 infants to be completely swapped from the moment they were born. Knowing full well that this mess alters the destiny of 2 families and the entire lives of 2 children, the hospital, in an effort to extend an official apology, specially invites both sets of parents for a formal meeting. Riota and his wife arrive right on time, and it is not long before the other couple, Yudai and Yukari, show up in a frantic rush. Next, the hospital staff asks both parties to exchange photos of the children. Separated by a long table, the 2 families stare at each other blankly while holding photos of each other's children, creating a stiff and suffocating atmosphere. The conversation quickly cuts to the core issue of whether or not they should swap the children back. Acting as the mediator, the hospital explicitly states they will not force a decision on anyone. Yet from the standpoint of societal norms and biological ethics, they subtly suggest that both families consider the children's bloodlines and try to return them to their biological parents. But 6 years of living together day and night is not something that can be easily torn apart by a single sheet of a DNA paternity report. Caught between 6 years of nurturing love and an unalterable biological bloodline, both families fall into a long silence of agonizing inner conflict, with neither side having the heart to make a definitive call on the spot. After endless hesitation, both sides reach a mutual agreement to first arrange for the kids to meet and hang out, letting them get familiar with each other and slowly adapt to these new relatives and environments before taking step-by-step steps to discuss future arrangements. Soon enough, the first scheduled meeting arrives as planned. Riota and his wife desperately try to maintain a facade of composure, but they cannot hide the deep anxiety and restlessness flickering in their eyes. On the flip side, Yudai's family is dressed casually and simply, acting completely relaxed and natural without a single ounce of forced politeness or awkward restraint. Aside from the lively and mischievous Ryusei, the couple is also surrounded by 2 even younger children. Ryota's eyes constantly drift toward Ryusei, instinctively sizing up this biological son he has never laid eyes on until now. Completely unlike the sweet and obedient Keita, Ryusei, who grew up in a lively, down-to-earth household, is naturally energetic, bold, and expressive, lacking any of the rigid manners of an elite family and fully accustomed to a free, laid-back lifestyle. The contrasting personalities of the 2 boys quietly mirror the starkly different lifestyles of the 2 households, highlighting the deep-rooted ideological chasm between the adults. From start to finish, all Riota cares about is the cause of the mix-up, who is held liable, and how to legally and cleanly get Ryusei back. Meanwhile, Yudai immediately asks about the hospital's financial compensation, using a direct and pragmatic tone that reflects a working-class family's instinctive demand for financial payout when hit by an unexpected crisis. But when Riota hears this, a flash of undisguised contempt crosses his eyes, confirming his belief that the man is vulgar, opportunistic, and small-minded. making him more convinced than ever that his biological son cannot be left in such a household. Before parting ways, Riota stands at the mall entrance, watching Yudai's family cram into an old, beaten-up van while the kids rowdily wave goodbye. Although he wears a pleasant smile, his mind is already completely made up. The moment he gets back to the office, he immediately gets in touch with a top-tier celebrity lawyer in the industry.
なんとか子供を2人とも引き取れる手段はないかなと思ってさ。すごいこと考えるね。今さら父親になれんのか、その相手の子の。とりあえず手元に置いてみるよ。まあ血は繋がってるんだ。なんとかなるだろう。
He genuinely looks down on the loose and careless atmosphere of Yudai's home, stubbornly believing that such a chaotic environment can never raise a polite, well-mannered child, and is completely unworthy of the proud bloodline legacy he passes down. Yet, the bond from 6 years of raising Keita day in and day out is deeply rooted in his heart, and he truly cannot bear to just let go and send Keita away. So, after weighing his options over and over, he secretly resolves to keep both boys by his side. He, from beginning to end, refuses to put himself in anyone else's shoes, never showing an ounce of empathy from the perspective of the children or Yudai's family. The win-win scenario he calculates in his mind is nothing more than self-righteous arrogance and delusion born from elite self-gratification. Later on, the hospital follows up on the case, and to prevent inflicting deep, unhealable trauma on the young minds, they propose starting with short-term weekend swaps so the two boys can gradually get to know each other's parents and living setups before slowly negotiating a permanent arrangement. And just like that, an absurd yet helpless child swap officially gets underway. Keita arrives at Yudai's cramped electronics repair shop, kicking off a completely unfamiliar life of financial hardship. There are no exquisite rooms or readily available material comforts here, leaving him with nothing but crude, worn-out furniture and simple, modest meals. On the flip side, Ryusei moves into the spacious, sophisticated luxury apartment, entering a life that is materially abundant yet incredibly suffocating. Riota tries his best to play the part of a qualified father by blindly showering Ryusei with the absolute best material conditions. Yet he constantly nitpicks the boy's every word and action. Taking all of this in, Midori clearly realizes that Riota is rushing things way too much. But knowing his stubborn, arrogant nature and how he never listens to anyone's advice, she ultimately lacks the courage to confront him directly, leaving her to silently ache for Ryusei, who is bound by rigid rules, while constantly worrying about Keita far away on the other side. Meanwhile, living in this new environment, Keita remains completely on eggshells. Under Ryota's rigid elite upbringing, he learns at a very young age to read people's expressions, becoming obedient and fiercely tolerant as he habitually suppresses his own nature just to cater to the expectations of adults. However, Yudai possesses a laid-back, open-minded personality, so when facing Keita, with whom he shares a bloodline but zero emotional bond, he does not care about any rules or etiquette, nor does he intentionally put on the high and mighty act of an elder, choosing instead to let his guard down and genuinely play and mess around with the boy. With his relaxed warmth and pressure-free companionship, he begins to slowly melt away the reserve and anxiety inside Keita's heart, allowing the boy to experience a sense of ease and security for the very first time where he doesn't have to deliberately suck up to anyone or walk on thin ice. But on the other side, Ryusei is consumed by a constant wave of suppression and resistance all day long, completely unaccustomed to the cold, distant atmosphere of the mansion, and finding the silent, rigid etiquette at the dining table even more unbearable. After moving into Ryota's home, Ryusei, who is naturally expressive, lively, and mischievous, turns walking on eggshells, reserved and introverted instead, not daring to throw tantrums, not daring to act spoiled, and not even possessing the courage to boldly speak his mind. He is constantly yearning for the poor, yet incredibly warm old house, missing the easygoing, gentle Yudai and his wife, and longing for his once noisy younger siblings even more. In stark contrast, Keita gradually falls head over heels for the relaxed, carefree life at Yudai's house. Every single time he returns from his new home, he always repeatedly presses them with the exact same question.
今度流星君のお家にいつ行くの？
次の土曜日よ。
これ持ってっていい？
いいよ。
すごいんだよ。何でも直しちゃうんだよ。
へえ、すごいね。
As time slowly ticks away, half a year has already flown by in this trial swap between the two families. In the blink of an eye, the scheduled family gathering arrives once again. Yudai completely drops his adult facade, immersing himself entirely into the kids' world as he runs, plays, and cuts loose right along with them. Meanwhile, Riota constantly sits all by himself off to the side, and this completely out-of-place posture does not escape Yudai's watchful eyes.
俺この半年で亮太さんが一緒にいた時間よりも長く経たてるよ。時間だけじゃないと思いますけど。何言ってんの。時間だよ。子供は時間。僕にしかできない仕事があるんですよ。父親家庭取り替えの期間仕事やろ。
Riota always uses toughening up and fostering independence as a crutch to make high-sounding excuses for his total lack of presence and companionship, never expecting that Yudai would call out his bluff right then and there. Despite coming from a humble background and living a simple life without any profound, sophisticated parenting philosophies or superior, abundant material conditions, Yudai deeply understands the true meaning of showing up. He knows down to his bones that childhood only happens once, and once a parent's presence is missing, there is absolutely no hitting rewind. Yet the obstinate Riota not only turns a completely deaf ear to this, but he even goes as far as to publicly throw down the selfish agenda he has been secretly harboring for the past 6 months.
じゃあ2人ともこっちに譲ってくれませんか。
あ？そうや。本気で言ってる。
What makes it even worse is that when faced with Yudai's unhesitating rejection, Riota instinctively plays the bargaining chip he has kept up his sleeve all along. In his deep-seated mindset, cold, hard cash can smooth over any sense of guilt or reluctance to let go. He takes it completely for granted that because Yudai's family is financially average, throwing a massive payout at them can easily buy out 6 full years of nurturing love. Little does he know that the warmth built from living day in and day out, along with the deep attachment forged through sleepless nights, can never be measured or replaced by a price tag. As the gathering abruptly cuts short, both families part ways on a bitter note. Not long after, the nurse involved in the incident back then is tracked down by the police, causing the truth that has been buried deep for years to finally surface. It turns out that swapping the babies is not an accident at all, but rather a deliberate act of malice on her part. Staring at the wealthy, successful, and respectable Riota and his wife, and contrasting them with her own miserable, shattered marriage, she develops an overwhelming sense of jealousy and psychological imbalance deep inside. Wait, abusing her position on duty, she uses an extreme and utterly selfish method to covertly switch the two newborns, quietly rewriting the destinies of both families from that moment on. However, because so many years have rolled by and the statute of limitations has long expired, this nurse ultimately faces no legal consequences, leaving absolutely no one to pay the price they deserve for this crime. The upended lives of these two families become a lifelong tragedy, with no one to hold accountable and no way to ever make things right. Right around the same time, Riota suddenly receives word that his father's health is failing. This time around, he finally puts his grueling workload on hold for a brief moment and sets out to visit the father he hasn't seen in ages. Yet the moment he steps through the front door, there is absolutely no relaxed vibe of a family reunion, nor is there any of the cozy intimacy of a child returning home, as he sits down stiffly and awkwardly, still clad in a sharply tailored business suit. Meanwhile, his father retains his usual cold and stern demeanor, sitting straight up on the sofa and holding court entirely on his own terms. Only his stepmother bustles about frantically in the background, constantly trying to break the ice and ease the awkwardness by comforting the old man while covering for Riota. Just a few brief exchanges put the years of coldness and estrangement between this father and son on full display. With both generations tightly wound up and completely clueless about how to show affection, Riota is bound to grow up lacking companionship, only to end up replicating the exact same cold fate as his father when he becomes an adult. After a few superficial pleasantries, his father cuts straight to the chase regarding the baby mix-up. He urges Riota not to hesitate any longer and to bring his biological child back as soon as humanly possible.
人も馬と同じで血が大事なんだ。これからどんどんその子はお前に似てくるぞ。ケイタは逆にどんどんその相手の親に似ていくんだ。
Riota listens in complete silence to this bloodline is everything lecture, yet a massive storm of conflicting emotions surges deep within his heart. In his father's eyes, biological bloodlines trump daily presence, pedigree outvalues upbringing, and children are merely accessories meant to pass down a lineage. And even though Riota faintly senses just how selfish and cruel this perspective is, he still instinctively cannot help but agree with it. The rigid mindset of the older generation, combined with the pride and arrogance he refuses to let go of, acts like a bottomless quicksand, causing him to sink deeper and deeper into an agonizing dilemma. Upon returning home that evening, the thoughtful Keita folds 2 little red paper flowers by hand, intending to give one to his father and keep the other for Uncle Yudai. Staring at the boy's pure, innocent face, Riota feels a sudden, violent jolt to his system as a cocktail of overwhelming emotions rushes over him. He suddenly realizes that dragging this out any further will only cause himself and both children to plunge deeper into absolute torment. So the very next day, he takes the initiative to head over to Yudai's house. That same night, Midori can no longer bottle up the resentment and frustration she has accumulated for so long, exploding into a ferocious argument with Riota. Midori fiercely tears into Riota, accusing him of never giving a damn about their son's feelings and emotions because all he values are grades, strict rules, and conventional success, reducing the boy to nothing more than a trophy ornament for his elite lifestyle. Riota desperately wants to fire back and defend himself, only to realize he doesn't have a single leg to stand on. Soon enough, the official permanent swap day arrives right on schedule. Keita is still filled with pure excitement, except this time, Riota assigns him a special mission.
向こうの家に行ったらおじさんとおばさんをパパとママって呼ぶんだぞ。寂しくても泣いたり電話してきたりしちゃダメだ。約束だ。
ミッション？
ミッション。
いつまで？
決まってない。
The kickoff of this mission officially signals that the 2 boys are going to be completely and permanently swapped. Yet, the young Keita and Ryusei have absolutely no understanding of the agonizing choices being made by the adults. However, when the 2 families snap that final group photo together, it marks the definitive curtain call on their tender past, signaling a silent, heartbreaking, and genuine goodbye. On his very first day in the new home, Riota immediately lays down a strict set of rules for Ryusei. No chewing on straws, mandatory English study every single day, a hard limit of 30 minutes on video games, and even an immediate change in how he addresses his parents. These rules are written down coldly on a sheet of paper. Confronted with this relentless barrage of restrictions, Ryusei, who grew up in a lively and carefree environment, feels nothing but a profound sense of alienation and suffocation. And as he watches Ryusei's resistant and bewildered expression right in front of him, Riota cannot help but constantly think back to the obedient, well-behaved Keita. Meanwhile, although Keita frequently misses his former home at this time, the emotionally perceptive Yudai always spots his dampened spirits immediately and goes entirely out of his way to put a smile back on his face. As the days relentlessly drag on, life becomes increasingly unbearable for Ryusei amidst the rigid rules and alien environment. Finally, on a quiet afternoon, he sneaks out of the house, relies entirely on his memory to transfer between 2 train lines by himself, and runs all the way back to his old home. Riota rushes over in a frantic hurry, completely dead set on bringing Ryusei right back. After experiencing the emotional weight of this frantic pursuit, he is finally willing to step down from his high horse, choosing to stop blindly imposing suffocating restrictions and instead starting to play and mess around with Ryusei, even going so far as to pitch a little tent on the balcony for them. Yet, the emotional chasm has already taken deep root, making it impossible for him to truly break into Ryusei's inner world. The jarring conflicts and torment of this misplaced existence continue to slam heavily against everyone's hearts. The following day, Riota aimlessly picks up his camera, only to accidentally discover that it is filled with photos Keita secretly took of him. His sleeping face, his profile while quietly reading, and his back turned while buried deep in work. It turns out that Keita has always been looking up to him and watching his every move in absolute silence, yet he himself has never truly looked at Keita, mirroring exactly how his own father has never truly seen him back in the day. Struck by a sudden epiphany, he rushes over to Yudai's house without losing a single second, but the moment Keita catches sight of him from afar, the boy instinctively turns on his heel and bolts. Riota keeps hot on his heels, chasing right after him.
ケイタに会いたくなっちゃって、
パパなんかパパじゃない。
約束破って会いに来ちゃった。
The two of them walk along parallel paths at different heights, with Keita on the upper track and Riota down on the lower one, symbolizing that he has completely discarded his former high and mighty attitude, choosing to look at things from the child's perspective as he reflects deeply on his own obsession and coldness. Yet, no matter how desperately he voices his apologies, the tiny figure keeps marching forward, refusing to turn around.
バラの花、ごめんな。なくしちゃってごめんな。カメラ、写真もいっぱい撮ってくれてたんだな。ピアノもさ、パパもピアノ途中でやめたから、もうね、もうミッションなんか終わりだ。
As the two parallel paths gently merge at the very end, the emotional wall that once stood firmly between father and son completely vanishes into thin air. At this exact moment, Riota is stripped of all elite arrogance and rigid stubbornness, leaving behind nothing but raw honesty and overwhelming guilt after dropping every single piece of his armor. Staring at this father who is no longer acting untouchable, and even shows a glimmer of vulnerability, Keita can finally hold it in no longer, letting a flood of long repressed grievances, fears, and deep longing burst wide open. As our story draws to a close, the Nonomiya family keeps the gentle, introverted Keita by their side, while loving the energetic, free-spirited Ryusei as their very own. Meanwhile, the Udayas keep Ryusei, who grew up with them, but the sensitive, gentle Keita will always be in their thoughts. It is no longer a question of who replaces whom or who belongs to which family, but rather that both households have gained an extra son. Bloodlines might determine where your story begins, but daily presence, growing up together, mutual devotion, and pure unconditional love are what truly define a family.